There exists a certain ache that doesn't leave bruises or blood, but it carves its mark far deeper than any blade. It's not the kind of pain that makes others rush to your side. It's the kind that hides behind steady eyes and quiet nods. It's the sting of being dismissed, the slow erosion of your worth by 1,000 subtle slights. You know the kind. It shows up when your sentence is sliced in half by someone louder, when your contribution gets overlooked like background noise, when your decency is interpreted as weakness, and worst of all, you swallow your protest and let it pass. You stay quiet, you stay pleasant, you stay erased. But that silence, that pause you thought was humility, wasn't always noble. Sometimes it was betrayal of yourself. Machiavelli would have seen that hush not as restraint, but as a missed opportunity to assert your dignity, not because you didn't bark back, but because you gave silent permission. Disrespect doesn't need a megaphone. It grows in whispers. It feeds on non-resistance. It doesn't need a fight. It just needs your consent. Allow it once, and it gets comfortable. Feed it your stillness, and it begins to wear your face. This isn't about ego. This isn't about demanding praise or admiration. It's about the currency of power, the way the world appraises your presence and, perhaps more critically, the way you begin to price yourself. We are taught to be gentle, to be agreeable, to forgive without question. And there's a beauty in that, surely. But when you consistently offer softness in an environment that only respects sharpness, your generosity becomes invisible, your empathy becomes a ghost, and you disappear. This is where Niccolo Machiavelli's brutal insights pierce through modern pleasantries. His words weren't wrapped in sentiment. They were forged in realism. He didn't write for dreamers. He wrote for those who'd been gutted by loyalty, betrayed by trust, and left standing in the ruins of their own patience. He knew that the world didn't always punish the wicked. It often devoured the innocent who thought virtue was enough. He said plainly, "If you must choose between being feared or being loved, pick fear." But he wasn't advocating tyranny. He was offering a kind of armor. He was saying, make yourself undeniable. For Machiavelli, fear wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. It was an unmistakable boundary that taught others not to underestimate you, not because you threatened them, but because you carried yourself like someone who would not be dismissed. In that spirit, consider your life. You may not wear a crown, but you are the sovereign of your schedule, the ruler of your peace, the architect of your space. And if you don't fortify those borders, the world will barge in with muddy boots. Respect, then, is a mirror. What you project, it reflects. If you hold your spine straight, it reflects honor. If you slouch into doubt, it reflects fragility. People don't always think deeply about how they treat you. They respond to the signals you give off. When you consistently laugh at demeaning jokes, accept decisions made without your input, or excuse slights as misunderstandings, you are, in effect, training those around you. Not because they are malicious, but because most people probe for limits. They knock gently at first. If there's no resistance, they lean in further. Until one day, you find yourself a stranger in your own story. Machiavelli used animals to explain power, the cunning fox who sees through deception and the fearless lion who stands his ground. These aren't just metaphors for kings and diplomats. These are roles every one of us must play in the theater of everyday life. The fox listens beneath the compliment for the hidden jab. It detects the manipulation dressed up as kindness. It recognizes when a smile is just a mask for dominance. The lion, on the other hand, doesn't argue. It doesn't react to every taunt. It simply exists in a way that commands reverence. It knows what it is. In modern terms, this is the art of still power. You don't have to retaliate to every disrespect, but you do need to recognize it. You need to mark it, quietly perhaps, but firmly. You need to adjust. Limit their access, reclaim the parts of yourself you've lent to people who haven't valued them. This isn't about revenge. This is about recentering. You're not asking for their respect. You're removing yourself until they have no choice but to notice your absence. True authority doesn't shout. It whispers with certainty. It sits still while others scramble. It doesn't need to win the room. It already owns its own presence. When you know your worth, when your boundaries are no longer up for negotiation, your silence becomes fluent. People hear it, they respond to it, they learn to speak more carefully around you, not out of fear but out of newfound regard. That's the paradox. When you stop chasing affirmation, you often begin to receive it, because people can sense the difference between someone who needs to be liked and someone who respects themselves too much to beg. And in this world obsessed with applause and external validation, that kind of self-containment becomes a rare gem. And rare things, they're treated differently. To shift this dynamic, it starts with a new understanding of what kindness actually means. Kindness does not mean always being agreeable. It doesn't mean being available to everyone at all times. It doesn't mean allowing others to mistake your empathy for naivety. True kindness is deliberate. It's discerning. It knows when to open the door and when to lock it. It doesn't seek to be rewarded. It seeks to be respected. Machiavelli would argue that your power rises not when you scream for it, but when you stop justifying your value. When you no longer feel the need to apologize for your standards. When you resist the urge to shrink so others feel comfortable in your presence. Because when your foundation is firm, you stop seeking scaffolding in others. That's when everything shifts. The way people talk to you, the way they listen, the way they approach. Not because you ask them to, but because your energy demands it. Disrespect cannot survive in the presence of unshakable self-respect. Not because it's crushed, but because it simply finds no place to root itself. So don't react with equal force. Rise above, elevate. Refine your space until it becomes inhospitable to those who come bearing hidden insults and conditional acceptance. This isn't about being untouchable. It's about being intolerant of erosion. Erosion of your peace, your pride, your personhood. Let your new standard be so high that anything lesser just falls away. This is the foundation of internal power, the kind that doesn't require noise to be heard, the kind that's felt in your presence, the kind that Machiavelli understood, strategic, grounded, unflinching, not ruthless but resolute, not cold but composed, the kind of power that doesn't retaliate but exits. As you adopt this new approach, you will begin to notice something. The dynamics around you change. People either rise to the level you've set or find themselves out of alignment. Some may leave, some may resist. That's fine, that's good. Let them go. Let the room rearrange itself around the person you've become. That's not a loss, that's a rebalancing. This is how you end disrespect. Not with war, but with withdrawal. Not with vengeance, but with value. And in that space of quiet conviction, you become the kind of person whose absence is louder than their presence ever needed to be. But before we go further, turn inward. Take a real look. Not at the theory, not at the words, but at the reflection. How do these principles show up in your reality? In your home, in your job, in your relationships, in the way you speak or don't speak when something cuts too close? You know the lion and the fox now. You understand how small acts of tolerance can become habits of self-erasure. But understanding is the first step, not the finish line. The next chapter is application. And here's where it gets hardest. Not when the offense is loud, not when it comes from strangers, but when it arrives, quietly, wrapped in familiarity, Because when disrespect wears the face of someone you love, when it comes from your family, your partner, your oldest friend, the challenge grows tenfold. You hesitate, not because you don't feel it, but because you still hope they'll see your worth without you having to spell it out. You hope your silence will inspire change. You wait, thinking your patience will be proof of your value. But it won't. Machiavelli would tell you, affection cannot override principle. Devotion without self-preservation is not loyalty, it's surrender. And every time you excuse disregard from someone close, you reinforce the very dynamic you wish would change. Often disrespect doesn't arrive as cruelty, it shows up as indifference, as exclusion, as being taken for granted again and again. You tell yourself, they didn't mean it. But the intention isn't always the issue. Impact is. If someone routinely steps on your needs, deliberately or not, the pain still lands. And over time, it builds a story inside you. One where you're not worthy of being considered, not important enough to count. So many wait for the final straw, for the blatant insult. But that's not when it begins. It starts earlier, in the quiet dismissals, the small betrayals, the subtle erasures, and by the time it's undeniable, the damage is already done. Not all at once, but gradually. Drip by drip. A slow dismantling of your sense of worth. To act earlier, you must learn to tune in, to feel the shift inside after a conversation. Are you drained or nourished? Do you feel smaller or seen? The world rarely crosses your line suddenly. It tests gently. It watches. If you don't resist, it moves in further. Now picture a different reality. One where your boundaries are not drawn from fear, but from reverence for yourself. One where
you respond to disrespect not with fury, but with decisive clarity. Where you exit not out of anger, but because you refuse to remain in spaces that require you to beg for recognition. This is where your philosophy becomes practice. When you choose not to explain your lines, but live by them. When you stop over-explaining your pain just to make others understand. When you realize your soul deserves fluency in its own defense. You teach others every moment by what you tolerate, what you accept, and what you ignore. But more importantly, you teach yourself. Machiavelli understood this. The mind creates stories to justify the heart's compromises. We stay where we suffer and call it duty. We mistake tolerance for maturity. But the truth is, no loyalty should ever come at the cost of your soul. Now ask yourself, what are you calling love that's really just endurance? What are you accepting as normal that quietly chips away at the best of who you are? When did you last ask yourself if the spaces you occupy still deserve your presence, or if you've simply stayed out of habit, fear, or history? The lion does not pace within cages, and the fox does not retrace its steps into known traps. So why do you return to the same places where your voice is flattened, your effort overlooked, your soul made to feel like an inconvenience? This is not strength. It's familiarity dressed up as safety. But safety that costs you your self-worth is not safety at all. It's slow surrender. Reflection isn't passive. It's a call to action. To examine the places in your life where your boundaries are treated as suggestions, where your no has lost its weight, where your silence is mistaken for indifference when it's actually exhaustion. And more importantly, to ask why you've tolerated it. Not to judge yourself, but to reclaim yourself. Because behind every tolerated slight, there is usually a reason. Fear of abandonment, fear of being alone, fear of causing discomfort. We tell ourselves, it's not a big deal, until it becomes a pattern. And then the pattern becomes a reality. One where your peace is always on the line, and your value is always conditional. But what if you chose differently? What if the next time someone crossed a line, instead of wondering if you were overreacting, you trusted your body's signal? That subtle contraction in your chest, that tension in your shoulders, that voice inside that says, this doesn't feel right. What if you stopped needing overwhelming evidence to honor your instinct? Machiavelli would not have waited for repeated offenses. He understood that influence lies in the immediate response. Not emotional, not reactive, but calibrated, quiet, swift, clear. The moment someone disregards your worth, the correction must follow, not in anger, but in firmness, not as retaliation, but as instruction. When you begin to live this way, the people who once counted on your silence will notice, and they won't all applaud. Some will test you again, hoping you'll fold. Others will fade, unable to thrive in the presence of your new clarity. And that's okay. Not every loss is a tragedy. Sometimes it's a pruning, a refinement, a clearing of the path. Because when you elevate your standards, your life adjusts. What once felt like connection now feels like compromise. What once passed as love now feels like obligation. And that's the discomfort of growth. It reveals what was never solid. But in that discomfort lies your new foundation, not built on being palatable, but being powerful. And let's be clear, this isn't about becoming callous. It's not about shutting everyone out. It's about choosing yourself as the baseline, about treating your presence as something that must be earned, not assumed. It's about remembering that the way people treat you is a mirror of the terms you've taught them. So, teach them well, not through sermons, but through standards. Let your no be unshakable. Let your yes be rare and intentional. Let your distance speak where words are no longer effective. And when they question your change, let them sit with their own reflection. You are not responsible for their discomfort with your growth. The world often mislabels your boundaries as coldness, your solitude as arrogance, your stillness as detachment. But these are only misunderstandings from those who've benefited from your lack of protection. Let them misunderstand. Let them wonder. Let them gossip. Because while they talk, you rebuild. Quietly, powerfully, with every decision that honors your truth. This is the revolution, not in fists or fury, but in presence. In poise. In choosing peace not because you lack the strength to fight, but because you've outgrown the battlefield. You've realized that not every engagement is worth the cost, that not every opinion deserves your energy, that sometimes the greatest victory is in walking away. And when you do, something shifts. You begin to find people who don't require explanations, who respect your space without needing to be reminded, who hear your silence as clearly as your words. These people exist, but they don't show up until you make room for them, until you release what you've outgrown. Let this be your compass. Not the desire to be liked, but the desire to be aligned. Aligned with your values, your peace, your future. Let go of the version of yourself that tolerated too much just to be included, that bent backwards to be understood, that watered itself down to avoid making waves. You were not made to be a reflection of other people's comfort. You were made to be whole, to stand tall in rooms that never expected you to rise, to claim your voice even when it shakes, to embody the dignity you kept giving away in pieces. That ends now. Because self-respect isn't loud. It's not a speech or a slogan. It's a quiet decision, repeated daily. It's the way you respond when someone crosses the line. It's how you show up after they underestimated you. It's the grace you choose when bitterness would be easier. It's the clarity you maintain when chaos calls your name. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone. The need for validation is a trap that chains you to people who never deserved your softness. Let go. You are not their idea of who you should be. You are not their version of enough. You are your own measure now. And that measure is high, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Because the world will not hand you the respect you deserve. You must claim it. Not by shouting, but by being unshakable. By choosing silence that nurtures you over noise that erodes you. By drawing lines and letting the chips fall where they may. This is the essence of quiet power. It does not perform. It does not entertain. It does not seek permission. It simply exists, fully, unapologetically. And in doing so, it sets the tone. It shapes the room. It draws the line between who can stay and who must go. Machiavelli understood this kind of strength. He knew that survival in a complex world wasn't about being the most virtuous. It was about being the most aware, about knowing when to move, when to pause, and when to sever ties. He didn't advocate cruelty. He advocated clarity. And clarity, when coupled with conviction, becomes unbreakable. So here's your invitation, not to change overnight, but to return. To the part of you that always knew what was unacceptable, to the part of you that never wanted to settle, to the version of you that didn't need to shrink in order to feel safe. That part is still there, waiting, watching, ready. You don't owe the world your ease. You don't owe them explanations. What you owe is to yourself. To live a life where dignity isn't negotiated, where peace isn't begged for, where respect is not a luxury but a standard. This is your territory. Guard it like it matters, because it does. And in time, you'll notice. Those who remain will match your rhythm. They will meet your gaze with respect. They will speak your name with care. Not because you asked them to, but because your energy allows for nothing less. This is not a fantasy. This is a choice. One brave decision at a time, one boundary at a time, one withdrawal at a time. You don't have to burn bridges. You simply stop crossing them. You don't have to fight everyone. You just stop inviting them where they don't belong. Because when you love yourself deeply, consistently, without apology, you begin to build a life where disrespect cannot survive. Not because you're cruel, but because you're clear. And that clarity, oh, that clarity, is everything. It speaks louder than anger. It outlasts resentment. It carves out space for a new way of being. One where your silence is not weakness but wisdom. One where your presence is not an invitation to take, but a reminder to give respect or be gone. Let this be your new truth, that you are not a victim of others' treatment. You are the curator of your experience, and in that role, you are powerful, you are precise, you are deliberate. From this moment forward, may your life become a filter. Let the noise fall away. Let the real remain. Let your soul stretch into its full height. And when they ask why you changed, tell them, I didn't change. I remembered who I was before I learned to make myself small, before I thought pleasing meant peace, before I accepted crumbs and called it care. This is your quiet uprising, not with fury, but with stillness, not with arguments, but with absences, not with guilt, but with grace. Let them adjust or let them leave. Either way, you remain steady, whole, undiminished. That is how you kill disrespect. Not once, not with vengeance, but day by day, choice by choice. With every firm step away from what dishonors you. With every gentle return to your center. Until finally, disrespect becomes not something you fight, but something that cannot even find you. Let your life become the loudest no to anything that wounds you. Let your peace be the final answer. And let your dignity always be non-negotiable.